So the Western Conference Finals are officially set. We have the Dallas Mavericks matching up against the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is a series that I really wanted to see at the beginning of the postseason. On one end, you have this elite, dominant Minnesota Timberwolves defense that took out Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker in the first round, and in the second round took out the defending champion Denver Nuggets in 7 games. And more impressively, in that game 7, they were on the road and they were up against the ropes after the first half. The way they responded in that second half was flat out amazing. Their defense turned it up a notch. They were able to completely slow down Jamal Murray in that second half. I think he had like 24 in the first half, but they kind of slowed him down to 11 points in the second on just 5 for 12 shooting. Shout out to Anthony Edwards for just continuing to show up on the defensive end, but just great resilience from that Timberwolves group. And they're taking so much momentum and home court advantage into this round against the Mavericks. And for the Mavericks, they have been impressive offensively the entire season when healthy, but more impressive about them is their defense. So their defense took a major leap in the second half of the season. Me personally, I was wondering how translatable that defense would be in the playoffs, because we always have these teams that have these great defensive ratings in the regular season, and they kind of get to the playoffs and there's a big limitation, right? There's a big wall that they hit. I'm thinking specifically about the Utah Jazz back when they had like Donovan Mitchell and Bogdanovich and Conley, but that's not been the case at all with Dallas. They have taken that defense from the regular season and they have translated it very well to the postseason. On top of that, they're getting some great stuff defensively from Kyrie and also some great stuff defensively from Luka, which I never thought I'd say. Also great for Dallas to see that this Kyrie and Luka duo is better than a lot of people said it would be. I was a fan of that duo once the trade happened because I think Kyrie is really underrated with his ability to play both on and off the ball and coexist with other elite guards. People said it wasn't going to work. Now you look at them and they are in the Western Conference Finals. So let's see what ends up happening. This is going to be a very, very good series. A lot of different things kind of playing out here. Funny thing also about both of these teams is they both suffered from horrible refereeing in those elimination games. Bad refereeing in that game 6 between the Mavericks and the Thunder, and bad refereeing in that game 7 between the Nuggets and the Timberwolves. There were so many missed calls in that Nuggets Timberwolves game. I don't usually like doing the thing where I'm like the refs are favoring the other team, but it looked super obvious that that was the case late in that Nuggets Wolves game. But the Wolves still were able to come back. So despite all of that, despite bad reffing, despite not having home court advantage, despite being down big time at halftime, they still managed to come back and win. So they have so many intangibles they're bringing into the series, along with their great defense and the play of Anthony Edwards and those other guys. So the first interesting thing here about this series is gonna be the defense, right? That's what it really comes down to in the playoffs. Defensive matchups, defensive schemes, all of these things. Minnesota is the stronger defensive team. It's been that way for the entire season. And they have a ridiculous plethora of great individual defensive players. And that's one thing they have over Dallas. Dallas does have a great team defense. And they are having guys step up defensively big time, like PJ Washington, like Kyrie, like I said earlier. But Minnesota's got guys like Nikola Alexander-Walker, who's been amazing guarding at the point of attack at points in time. Anthony Edwards has become a very, very reliable, high-pressure defensive player at this point in his career. Naz Reid off the bench had some great defensive moments. Jaden McDaniels is obviously a great on-ball defender. Karl Anthony-Towns even had some great defensive moments when he was guarding Nikola Jokic in the post. And obviously they were able to put Rudy Gobert into pretty good defensive positioning throughout that series against Denver. So they have much better individual defenders that kind of fill up a great overall team defense. And I'm really interested to see how far this Anthony Edwards defense thing is going to go, right? How far does he push himself as this elite level two-way player? In the first round, he was guarding Bradley Beal, did an amazing job on him. Second round, guarded Jamal Murray a ton and did an amazing job at him. There were just times where he was flat out harassing Jamal Murray throughout that series. He said it last night in the post-game interview on Inside the NBA, his matchup is going to be Kyrie. So now you're matching up against one of the most skilled, if not the most skilled, point guard from an offensive standpoint in NBA history, still playing at an extremely high level. This is going to be the best individual defensive test of Anthony Edwards' career. I am very, very interested to see how that ends up playing out for him. So let's see what that does, but I want to see how far Ant can kind of take this entire defense thing. If he has a great series defensively on Kyrie, while going really efficient with high scoring performances on the other end, we're going to have to continue to have these serious conversations about him potentially being like a top 3, top 2, maybe number 1 player in the league. Who knows, right? So let's see how that translates into this round. So I think Minnesota overall as a team wins the defensive battle. As I said earlier, that defense proved itself against the toughest offensive puzzle in that Nuggets team in the second round. That's a tough offense to figure out. They have so many great shooters, an elite level 2-man game. And on top of that, a big man who is just virtually unguardable. Shoots it well inside the arc, outside the arc, great below post moves, and just is a major threat with his passing. They were able to contain that. One thing to pay attention to is how well the Wolves guard the high screen and roll. So obviously Dallas is going to do that a ton through Luka Doncic. One thing that they do very well, the Timberwolves, is they do a great job at having those on-ball defenders fight through screens. So NAW isn't going to just let himself get screened off and allow a less favorable matchup for Luka. He's going to do a good job of fighting through that screen, trying to stay home and trying to position Luka, kind of get him to angle himself in a way to where he's less of a threat in the half court. Same with Jaden McDaniels. Jaden McDaniels is really, really good with fighting through screens. That's one thing to pay attention to with the Wolves' high screen and roll defense is those guys do a great job at navigating through screens. That is a small detail, but a very important detail when trying to contain a team that's going to run a high volume of pick and rolls. They did it very well against Denver, and that's one thing that's going to translate here to this particular series. Also, Minnesota's rotations are amazing. One major difference between the Lakers and the Timberwolves, along with the Timberwolves having much better defensive personnel, Minnesota's rotations were just so good. So if they were going to double Jokic, or they ended up with a situation where 2 were on the ball, they did a great job at rotating and finding those shooters before allowing those really easy open looks that we saw the Lakers allow in that first round. The Timberwolves do a great job at keeping their rotations tight. They do a great job at recovering on like corner shooters, which is a big threat that Dallas presents, especially with Luka Doncic. He is so good at making that skip pass to like the weak side corner, and he did a great job at doing that and consistently punished OKC. So they would have maybe like SGA helping off of that weak side corner to be the low man. Luka would see that and make that read and consistently find somebody in the corner, and they would get a high quality corner 3-point shot up. One of the biggest differences between Dallas winning games in that OKC series and losing games was their volume of corner shots and how many corner shots they were making, right? I like Minnesota's ability to rotate back on the shooters a lot, and I think they'll be able to limit that. That was something that OKC didn't do well. That's something that LA didn't do well in that first round against Denver, and that's something that Minnesota is really, really good at, is getting back out on shooters. And even if they do, if kind of going back to the pick and roll thing, even if they do get into a situation where they end up with a mismatch, they're definitely going to try to get Gobert onto Luka as much as possible and kind of make him work out there. Gobert at this point in his career has solidified himself as a solid enough defender in space. There were some times where he had some great moments defensively in that first round guarding Kevin Durant. Now, KD isn't the same playmaking threat that Luka is, but still, Rudy Gobert, even if he does get taken out of the paint and he does end up switching on to Luka, has had some really good defensive moments guarding the perimeter this postseason. So that's something to also kind of keep an eye on. Biggest thing here for Minnesota is making sure their rotations continue to stay tight. I think another thing here is also Karl Anthony-Towns is going to end up having to guard like a PJ Washington. He's going to be in a lot of situations to where he's going to have to rotate out on the perimeter and on the shooters. Late in games, he has to stay out of foul trouble in those types of situations. Cat will take himself out of the game with bad fouls. I can see him getting bad fouls while trying to rotate back out on the shooters. Please don't let that be the case, because if Cat gets in foul trouble, that takes out a major option for them on the offensive end. Cat is at his best when he's defending well, when he's not fouling a ton, and when he's able to be a threat on offense. He will not be a threat on offense if he's not on the court. Cat is going to be caught in rotation a lot of times. He's going to have to get out on shooters and close out. He has to stay smart, stay out of foul trouble, and in doing that, he makes himself a much bigger threat offensively. So if like Anthony Edwards, they have a scheme against him that they can slow him down, just like he did in Game 7, Cat can kind of pick up the slack and make big plays. He has to stay out of foul trouble at all costs. Can he do that here against this Dallas team that's going to consistently try to make you rotate on the shooters and close out and try to keep you in rotation? We shall see. Cat's got to stay out of foul trouble. Big time X factor here. On the other end, impressive about Dallas is while they are relatively less lengthy and a little smaller on average than Minnesota, they have been one of the best offensive rebounding teams the entire postseason. As a matter of fact, I think they're the best active offensive rebounding team. They're averaging 12 per game. The Wolves are at 10 per game, but we do know that in the playoffs, games can 100% be won or lost based on rebounding differential. So Dallas does have that in their favor coming into the series, offensive rebounding advantages. How translatable is that going to be against this Timberwolves team, especially with the twin towers of Karl Anthony-Towns and Rudy Gobert? We shall see. But Gobert ain't the best rebounder. For him to be 7'1" and be that tall and all of that, and be that much of a presence on the floor with his size and with his height, he can get out rebounded. So that's one thing that Minnesota has to make sure that they do is try to contain Dallas on the offensive boards. Also, offensively for both teams, role players must come through. Maverick guys not named Kyrie and Luka are going to get a lot of corner looks. They're going to try to make sure those guys get a lot of corner looks, and they've got to make them. Luckily, they've done that throughout this postseason, especially PJ Washington, who has just been amazing. Ant has to have a consistent series offensively here for the Timberwolves. He had 2 games under 20 points in that series against Denver. So there are, as I said earlier, schemes that can slow him down. And if that ends up happening, that puts Minnesota in a rut if he's out of rhythm. And so from there, other guys have to make shots. Other guys have to be able to be, creative and find their looks and make those shots when they're presented to him. So that's Jaden McDaniels. He has to be ready to make those looks. Cat has to be ready to step up as a consistent second option like he was in Game 7, as I mentioned earlier. Right, Mike Conley was really good in Game 7 when he was getting open looks in that second half and knocking him down and punishing the defense for not rotating out there on him. So that's going to be a major thing here is other guys are going to have to step up offensively because there are schemes at this point in Anthony Edwards' career that can slow him down. He's only 22, right? And he has to continue to fill out his offensive game, but there are ways that he can be taken out of rhythm. There are ways he can be slowed down. So those other Timberwolves have got to be ready to be a threat from a scoring standpoint. With Karl Anthony-Towns, he had a couple of stinkers in that last round against the Nuggets. I had a 13-point game and a 14-point game, I think, in a couple of losses. So he has to stay consistent, and part of his consistency is being on the floor, which brings me right back to that point about defense. He has to stay out of foul trouble. He has to play smart defense because he didn't do that well in that second round and got away with it. Can't be the case here against this Dallas Mavericks team, especially with the crafty guys they've got out there. Like if he ends up matching up against Luka and gets switched on to him or something, Luka's going to figure out a way to get him in foul trouble and get him off the court as much as he can. So that's going to be huge. Cat's offensive consistency is directly dependent upon his ability to play smart defense. When Cat's not on the floor, he's a non-threat. Now, I do like the fact that they have Naz Reid, who was able to make up for some of Cat's mistakes when he came back in the game, both defensively and offensively. They got amazing minutes from Naz Reid on both ends. So there is that. And I do like what Minnesota has coming off the bench a little bit more than what Dallas has coming off the bench. There's Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and there's also the 6th man of the year, as I just mentioned, in Naz Reid. So overall, I like Minnesota's defensive edge a ton, and I already think they've proven themselves against the toughest offense in the playoffs. And by that I think they, solved the toughest puzzle in the playoffs so far. I think they're going to be able to take care of this Mavericks team, right? I think they're going to be able to have their way. On top of that, I mentioned before, they have a ton of momentum coming in. They have home court advantage. I don't see much reason for them not to be able to do it. Only way that doesn't happen is if they're beating themselves up, is if Cat's not in foul trouble, or Cat ends up in foul trouble, or if guys aren't rotating well defensively and they're falling asleep, or if they're not coming with the energy, right? It was an energy thing a couple of times they lost in that first round against Denver. But seeing what they did against the Nuggets, I think Dallas is a little bit below Denver from an offensive standpoint. So if that Wolves defense can figure that out, and again, it's a different challenge, it's a different team. But if they can figure out that Nuggets offense, they can figure out that Mavericks offense. That's just my opinion. And so because of that, I think Minnesota wins it. I've got them winning in 6. It's going to come down to consistency on offense. It's going to come down to making high IQ plays defensively, especially with Karl Anthony-Towns. But I like their momentum. I like the intangibles they're bringing. And I like the point that they have home court advantage. So I have them winning this series in 6. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. And we are in for an amazing Western Conference Finals round. We shall see who ends up coming out on top.